I also want to acknowledge our two candidates today. We have Michelle Flye, Christina Ruotolo, and I want to thank our three judges for being here. Malaika King Albrecht. Yes. Okay, it's a tongue twister.
It is.
Deborah Doolittle and Sherri Hollister.
Number one, I want to say thank you so much for the experience. Pamlico Writers Group, if you're in this area, you already know, offers so much to poetry lovers, writers of all genres, and it's been my great pleasure to have served as part of Pamlico Poet Laureate. So Deborah, now I'm going to give you a real bio. Deborah Doolittle has lived in lots of different places, but now calls North Carolina home. A Pushcart Prize nominee, she is the author of Floribunda and 3 chapbooks, No Crazy Notions, That Echo, and Bogbound, which is the one that's coming out from Orchard Street Press. Some of her poems have recently appeared or soon will appear in Comstock Review, Ebbetson Street, Iconoclast, Pinion Review, Rattle, Slant, The Stand, and in audio format, which is fabulous, on the Writer's Almanac. She shares a home with her husband. Hi, I know where he is. 4 house cats and a backyard full of birds. Next I come to Sherri Hollister. If you are part of Pamlico Writers Group, you certainly know who she is because these two get things done. She's the chair of the Pamlico Writers Group. She is the author of the Leeward Files and Herald Family Chronicles, a compilation of 9, count them, 9 books. That's fabulous. Published over the past 5 years. With a full-time job and a very large family to keep her busy, Sherri has continued to work hard to deliver quality programs and networking opportunities to Pamlico writers. Thank you, Sherri. It is because of Sherri's true grit, good word for you, and determination that PWG, the oldest writing group in Eastern North Carolina, has continued to thrive. Thank you, guys.
For those of you that might not know me, I will read my bio to you. I am the editor of Her Magazine. I'm the hot dish writer for the Daily Reflector newspaper, and I'm also a multimedia specialist at the Daily Reflector. I'm an adjunct creative writing instructor at Pitt Community College. I'm also a part-time bookseller at Barnes & Noble and a member of the Pamlico Writers Group. I am an award-winning poet. I was shortlisted for the 2019 James Applewhite Poetry Award. I was also a semifinalist for the 2020 Alex Albright Nonfiction Award. I have received numerous poetry awards throughout the years. I was a member of the South Carolina Poetry, South Carolina Poets member. I also won a wonderful scholarship in 2019 to Wild Acres, where I was able to go and spend a week with one of my professors at ECU, Luke Wisnott. I also had the privilege of studying under John Hoppenthaler as well at ECU and getting my master's degree. I have a master's degree in creative nonfiction. I have a bachelor's degree in communications and English literature from ECU. I'm co-author of the book The Day the Earth Moved Haiti, which is a nonfiction book which came out in 2012 and raised over $6,000 for 3 faith-based charities that delivered goods and everything to Haiti, which the same thing is happening right now. You can get that book online. And I'm also the author of the poetry collection, The Butterfly Net, which came out in 2008. That was my first self-published poetry collection, and since then I've been continuing to write poetry and support poetry throughout the community. So that's a little bit about myself. I did want to say that to me, poetry is a gift. For many, it's a compass. It's a way writers can navigate through thoughts, feelings, and emotions. When we open up a notebook, we write down those thoughts and those feelings and our emotions. And when we open up that notebook, we're exploring its depth and the beauty of words. We see beyond the words. For me, poetry awakens and nurtures the imagination. It engages the senses, and it allows me to break free into a world where there are limitless possibilities. As the Heart of the Poet, Pamlico Poet Laureate, if I were awarded that today, I would have the ability to share with others the reasons why poetry should remain in our classrooms and how we should foster and encourage the written word, writers young and old, through a variety of endeavors throughout the community during the 2-year term. So I'm going to read to you. I don't know how many poems you'd like us to read today.
Whatever.
Okay, I have 3 poems I'd like to read.
That's good.
The first one, I write a lot of elegies and a lot of narrative poetry. So this first one's called A Touch of Southern. Aunt Madge was nearing 80 when I was just 10. I remember her crouched low in her garden. Cabbage, collard, and mustard greens swaying sturdy in afternoon light. Her voice was rusty, worn in like a silo. She prayed to her plants, caressed leaves between liver-spotted hands, dug into the earth deep enough to pull out all the answers. She rubbed her tarnished fingers round the rim of a peach snuff can. A wad of amber-colored tobacco protruded from her leathery lip. She spat a sticky warm line down into a wide-mouthed mason jar. The black crow squawked a midday hymn outside her white clapboard house in Piedmont, North Carolina. Rocking chairs were pointed toward the sun, tomatoes turning ripe with envy, the day making its way down low as Aunt Madge rocked away sweat, snapping peas in an heirloom basket set firmly at her feet. So that's my first one.
If this award had been given when it was supposed to be, I would not have deserved to win, because at that time I was still a dabbler in the world of poetry. I didn't really consider myself a poet, and certainly not a representative for poetry, though I loved it and wrote it. I grew up loving poetry. My father had a collection of books in an old bookcase, and one of the books had a title like Great Poems or something like that. From a very early age, I read those poems over and over. Keats, Tennyson, and especially Emily Dickinson and Robert Frost. We were discussing earlier, we both love those two. I didn't always understand them, but I loved the rhythm of them. I felt it on a sort of elemental level in my bones. In 3rd grade, my teacher introduced me to a new kind of poetry when I walked into the room and saw the text for E.E. Cummings' In Just on the screen. It was then I realized writing is something to play with. Language is a toy. Deconstruct it and put it back together around your idea. That's what poetry is. About the same time, I read Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland for the first wonderful time and discovered I really loved the idea of playing with language. I wrote my first serious poem at the age of 12. It wasn't bad. It was published in my school's literary magazine, which I helped start. I guess I was into self-publishing at a very early age. Anyway, I thought you might want to hear part of this early example of my poetry. Whence the flame flickers thrice, and the sun sets beyond on a blue horizon, and the mountains and hills are ablaze, and glory upon those green, green fields, where the unicorn chooses to graze. In high school, I got distracted from poetry by the call of journalism. In high school, journalism is a sensible, easy, equation-based type of writing that is quite appealing. Answer the questions who, what, when, where, why, and how. Create a good lead and write the story. Ethics aren't even a question because, of course, you tell the unvarnished truth and stick to the facts. It was alluring in its simplicity. So I moved away from the rule-bending world of poetry to the other side of the spectrum. But as we all know, poetry is something that's in your blood. Even as I worked on our high school newspaper, I helped start our high school literary magazine, The Purple Fridge. Later, I got my bachelor's degree in journalism and mass communication from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. But journalism wasn't what I thought it was. And though I love the idea of supporting myself with my writing, the reality of that idea was different. So I went on to get my master's in library and information sciences. As the years went on, I dabbled in many styles of writing, both poetry and prose. Flash fiction, short stories, prose poetry, novels. I settled on romance for several years. I published and self-published my novels. And still, every now and then, the urge to write a poem would push through. And as my kids began school, I started wanting to be sure they were exposed to some of the same great poets I had been. For several years, I did a week-long poetry workshop at their school. I would introduce them to different forms of poetry like limericks, acrostics, haiku, sonnets, and I would always wind up the week with concrete poetry. We'd read and look at these forms together, and we'd write one together, and then they would write one on their own. I'm not a great public speaker or teacher, but I did truly enjoy these workshops. Even if those kids never went on to write another word of poetry, it felt good to know they had at least seen and heard some really good stuff, at least once. But I still didn't think of myself as a poet, even though I shared a bit of my poetry with them. But I think those workshops taught me, as well as the kids, that poetry wasn't important. I just started to write a little more poetry, a little less fiction, when I took over the next chapter of Books and Art in New Bern. Then I submitted some of my poetry to this Poet Laureate contest. I didn't really think I was good enough or serious enough or should even be considered. But I thought, hey, why not? And when I found out I was a finalist, I was confounded. How on earth did this happen when I had a hard time considering myself a poet? And then a funny thing happened, sort of a magical thing. I submitted a poem to a local contest, and while I didn't win, I did go to the reception. And they gave me a sticker that said poet on it. And I put that sticker on, suddenly I was a poet. I saved that sticker for a long time. I kept it on my phone case until it wore out. But the feeling of being a poet has not. Since applying for this position of part of the Pamlico Poet Laureate, I have published 3 books of poetry and 1 graphic novel based on my poetry. I started the Next Chapter Literary Magazine, which accepts poetry, prose, and art from those with ties to Eastern North Carolina. I published 3 issues, and the 4th will be out in January. I'm a bookseller now. I'm a bookmaker. I'm a writer. And at my most elemental level, I know now that I am a poet. And so I'd like to share with you a few of my poems. The first is Unsung, the title poem of my collection of illustrated poetry. I hold it in my breast, a breath unbreathed, a dream undreamed, a moment unloved, a song I won't hear. It doesn't die, it won't decay. It flutters constantly. Glass wings against my chest hurt. What would happen if I let it out, set it free on an unsuspecting world? I think I will.
And it was a very tough decision. We both would be bringing lots of strengths to the position, but ultimately we decided that Michelle Flye